This is the Corsair iQOO 220T RGB Airflow. Might be Airflow RGB. I'm not sure, the name is too long, we're gonna call it the 220T for the remainder of the video. And if you have a really keen eye, you might notice that this case looks awfully similar to a competitor. But is that really a bad thing in 2019? And let's be honest, we've seen nearly every possible iteration for a mid-tower on the market. Companies have tried everything, it seems like, and some of them are falling back on a tried and true design like this one right here. We're gonna talk about it, the things I like, the things I don't like, and whether or not you should buy one. The Be Quiet Dark Rock Slim may be small, but it also packs one heck of a punch. It won't interfere with your system RAM because it's super slim. It's also super easy to install, and it looks mighty fine in virtually any rig. Oh, and did I mention the cooler runs quiet? I know, nothing in the product's name would have suggested it. Okay, I'll be quiet now. Grab the Dark Rock Slim via the link in this video's description. Let's start first with the front panel. It's likely the thing you'll notice right off the bat, and that's because it's an interesting design choice. We've got a bunch of half-completed triangles here, little perforations that are supposed to allow air to pass through unhindered. We'll be sure to test that in our temperature test here soon. Stay tuned for that. But I do want to mention that it's easy to remove. And you can see underneath that we have a very fine mesh dust filter. This is held in place by a couple of little divots here on the bottom and magnets up top. So that's convenient. You just drop it back in place and it sticks. This doesn't look to be very restrictive, so I'm not gonna run tests without this. I recommend you keep this because the holes on the front panel are pretty large and you'll be letting a ton of dust in if you decide to just run this without the dust filter. By the way, these fans are sure to impress at this price point. You get 3 of them with this case, and they all have LEDs at the center, similar to, I mean, they're like Corsair LL fans, basically. You have LEDs here in the center, and they spread out across all of these fan blades that are partially diffused, kind of partially transparent, so they spread that light out evenly, basically is what I'm trying to say. You get 3 of these fans, and yeah, I'd say this is a pretty sweet deal. You can control these with the iQOO software. I'm not the biggest fan of iQOO, but I would prefer that in its current state over CAM, so that's something to consider. And yeah, again, you get 3 of them. Like, I think that's really nice. All 3 up front. You can see them partially through the front panel, and they also do a decent job lighting up some of the internals of your system as well. So if you don't like RGB, turn them off, but if you do like them, you can do a lot with these 3. Up top, you'll find 2 USB 3 Type A ports, a dedicated power button, a unified microphone and headphone jack, as well as a reset switch. And behind that, you get this gray mesh. Actually looks really nice with this gray trim wrapping around, and especially the white frame. And look, it's not the thinnest mesh, it's gonna be rather restrictive, but it's much better than a closed off top panel, and you do get support up top for up to a 280 fan config. So 2 140s will fit up here. That's really nice. And you might even be able to get a 280 mil AIO up here. I don't think I have a 280 mil on hand. Yeah, I don't think I do. It's gonna be awfully tight. I'll put something in the video, some kind of text that'll let you know if it actually is officially supported on Corsair's website or not. But definitely a 240 mil AIO will fit up here. And the mounting points, you can see, are pushed far enough to the left side that you shouldn't have too much interference with RAM and motherboard VRM heat sinks. Now at the rear here, you definitively have a mid-tower, right? 7 PCIe slots back here. You have support for a 120 mil fan rad combo. You can slide that fan up and down. And then you also have your cutout for a power supply down below. You don't have vertical graphics card support. That's okay. This case really isn't intended for custom water cooling. You'll see it's pretty compact on the inside. One thing to point out though, these PCIe slots are covered by black little covers, and I think that's kind of weird. It's not ugly because there are other black accents in the white model, but if you're, you know, super picky, I kind of don't blame you. This could bother you just a bit. And underneath the case, you can see things are pretty straightforward. You have 4 rubberized feet that take the case off the ground by about 2 centimeters. You have a dust filter for the power supply, which is convenient. You can remove that need be. You also have 4 Phillips screws here that connect the hard drive cage to the base of the chassis. You can slide that forward up to the point where it nearly touches the 3 stock fans up front. So you have a bit of versatility here. You can see there's not much room for an extended power supply, and it would be helpful to move this cage forward. Nice to see that support. Now let's talk about internals. This case looks an awfully lot like the Fractal Design Meshify C or Define C, depending on how you're looking at it. It's nearly a copycat. I'm not going to complain though. I've seen other companies do this same thing before. Fractal Design has copied other people in the past as well. Maybe not with the entire form factor, but you know, they've copied bits and pieces because they know that other companies can do things better than they can at any given point. So as long as it's not patented and it's perfectly legal, they're going to do something very similar, but maybe add their own little twist to it. Corsair's definitely done that here. I don't think there's any denying that. They might not come out and say it, but this looks so similar to a Fractal Design Meshify C. It's actually one of the reasons why I like this case, believe it or not. I think that Corsair picked up on the right design cues from Fractal or whoever they were inspired by. Maybe they were inspired by themselves. I'm not sure, but yeah, looks a lot like one. And you're going to see here shortly that there are a few hardware compatibility issues to keep in mind with a chassis that is not very long from front to back. You're going to have to watch for extended graphics cards. Cards that are extremely long might not fit if you put an AIO up front as well. That was an issue with the Define C and Meshify C, just FYI. Really apart from that, I don't think you're going to have maybe some CPU cooler clearance issues. For the most part, you're going to be fine there. But the graphics card is the big one. Keep that in mind. And look, I think that's a worthy compromise. There aren't many cards that are going to be that long, and what you're going to get aesthetically is a build that nearly fills up the entire case, assuming you're going with an ATX build. I really like that. I like compact builds when you don't have wasted space, and that's exactly what the 220T from Corsair does. It's what the Define C and the Meshify C do as well. Again, one of the reasons why I like those cases so much. So you've got a basement that extends the entire depth of the case. You have a cutout up front for up to a 360mm AIO. That's nice, but you do have to remove the hard drive tray in order to fit that down there, because if you tried to move the hard drive tray any further back, you'd be hitting the power supply. Even standard, kind of conventional ATX PSUs wouldn't fit if this hard drive cage was moved any further back. So that's another downside I did mention earlier about a more compact mid-tower. So that's one large rubber grommet down below for dedicated PCIe supplemental power for your graphics card, and 3 rubber grommets to the right of the motherboard tray, good for routing things like USB 3 and your 24 pin. By the way, while we're on this side, I'd like to point out that the left tempered glass panel, it's the only tempered glass panel you get with this chassis. It does come in a rather transparent form. It is really not tinted at all. This is probably the least tinted tempered glass panel I've seen, and I actually dig this a lot. I'm not a fan of dark tempered glass, especially on white cases. I wish that there were options you could choose between the two for some other brands, but Corsair did it smart here in my opinion. With a white build, you want to see your white components, you want to see your cable management, things of that sort. Show it off. You can't really do that with dark tinted glass. All you really end up seeing is the RGB. So you can see now this is a tempered glass on the case, and it's almost totally transparent. Really nice feature here from Corsair. The only thing I'd like to see changed here, we don't have any trim. I would like to have seen gray trim to match the front trim here, but there's nothing underneath the glass around the edges to prevent us from seeing this straight up just bare white frame underneath. So that's kind of disappointing. It's not the cleanest look. It's just, it's either an oversight or a cost-saving measure. Either way, I would have liked to have seen it included instead. Now this is what the right side of the case looks like behind the motherboard tray. You can see we've got 2 of these SSD trays that are held on by a single thumb screw apiece. Nice use of otherwise wasted space. We also have an integrated RGB controller here. This is good for the 3 RGB fans that are included stock up front. These are not fan connectors. You have to plug the fans themselves into connectors on your motherboard. So don't confuse this for a fan hub. It's just for the RGB control that connects to your motherboard via a single USB 2 connector. And then you also have Molex power, or excuse me, not Molex power. This is SATA power. I'm really glad we don't have Molex here. Now with respect to cable management back here, this has been Corsair's Achilles heel in the past. We reviewed the 400C a long time ago, and that case had close to 1/4 of an inch worth of cable management space behind the motherboard tray. That was cutting it so close. It was my biggest complaint by far of the 400C, and it's actually my biggest complaint of the 220T as well. So about 1/2 inch of clearance here behind the motherboard tray, and then closer toward the front, this area of the panel actually indents a little bit more toward the left, kind of like how Fractal does it with their Meshify C and their Define C. So you get a bit more cable management space here. That's good for thicker cables like your 24 pin, so that's nice. A little over 3/4 of an inch on this side. So it does get better closer toward the front, which is where a majority of your cables will be. But I will say, adding an extra 1/2 inch on the right side, in my opinion, it's not going to hurt anybody. It's going to barely change the overall dimensions, the overall volume of this case. It shouldn't cost much more. They can get the framework right from the start, and that would just make cable management so much easier back here. We're going to build in it. I'll show you what I mean. I don't expect it to be as big a problem as the 400C, but it is something you need to just keep in mind, because the Meshify C is going to be easier. It will be easier to cable manage in. Again, my biggest complaint of this case, but it's not a deal breaker because it's not that bad. It's just not as good as some competitors. And again, because this case is not very deep from front to back, you can see we don't have a ton of space back here for a standard ATX power supply with the hard drive cage included. Now, if you're not using hard drives, you can remove this piece of cake. That'll also free up space for 360mm AIO. As is, you can see we have about 1/2 inch of clearance between the stock fans and where the hard drive cage begins. And this is the furthest back that the hard drive cage will go. So you could actually move this even more forward if you wanted, which I expect is what you're going to need to do anyway with most ATX power supplies. That's what I'll need to do with the power supply we're going to use here from Be Quiet. So I'm going to remove the hard drive cage for this build just because I want it to be a bit easier to cable manage back here. It's a trade-off, folks. That's just what you get with a more compact case. I'm not really going to fault the case for this. It's just something you need to know going into it. If you want a smaller, more compact mid-tower, this is a pretty substantial trade-off. And if you have a hard drive, then you're going to want to use a very small power supply or completely switch cases. All right, so I've shown you pretty much everything there is to see in the Corsair iQ 220 RGB Airflow, assuming that's the name. I don't remember if it's Airflow RGB or if it's RGB Airflow, whatever, the 220T. Now we're going to build in it, and I'm going to run our temperature test. We're going to compare this case to the NZXT H500, which is similar in terms of its footprint, but might have better or worse airflow, depending on the orientation of the fans and how restrictive this front panel is. So we'll test things with the front panel on and off, of course, to get a baseline, make sure those temps, those temp numbers are consistent, and then yeah, we'll go from there. I have an idea which case is going to be better, and I think given the stock placement, I think that's going to have a lot to do with the temperatures we see. So let's build in it, and then you'll see those temp tests. So we're gonna run through temps fairly quick. I forgot to take out the IO shield when I tore this PC down. Probably gonna need that. I've full on like packed these cases back up, put them in the garage only to realize that I left the IO shield in the case. Yeah. Perks of being a tech YouTuber. Anyway, I have the temp charts here. I just took a picture of the charts and you'll see the actual charts on screen. I had to retest a few different cases because we switched graphics cards for these tests and just want to make sure that we have a level playing field. So you'll see the Thermaltake Versa N24, which is a pretty hot case, at least for the CPU in here, as well as the Be Quiet Dark Base 700, the NZXT H500, the Corsair 220T, and the Fractal Design Meshify S2. Starting with CPU synthetic load temperatures, you can see the Versa N24 was by far the hottest at 91 degrees. That's the hottest of the 6 cores in this system. And then the Dark Base 700 yielded 88 degree max temps for that single core. The NZXT H500 brought things down to 86 degrees. The Corsair 220T brought things down to 83 degrees Celsius. And then the Fractal Design Meshify S2 brought it to 82. I would regard the Meshify S2 as one of the best airflow cases on the market. Not the best, but it's in the running for the, I mean, I know Antec and Silverstone make some pretty, pretty good cases with respect to airflow. I haven't tested any of those, so I just don't have them in my library. But I will say that the 220T is one of those cases that surprised me a lot. I thought that the front panel would be more restrictive than it actually is. It's just kind of a weird design, and at least half of it is totally blocked off. But air somehow finds its way relatively unhindered into the chassis thanks to the 3 fans up front at a 50% fan curve load. This is pretty impressive here, right? We're only about a degree or two away from the Meshify S2, which is a more expensive case and which from the outside looks to be a bit more airflow preferential. Moving on to GPU synthetic load temps. there's really not much to look at here. It's kind of a boring graph, to be completely honest with you. The 220T had a 1 degree delta between front panel being on versus off, which suggests, first off, that the graphics card is really not thermally limited at all. And then second off, it's at least getting enough air to maintain that temperature around 64, 65 C. These cards are going to kind of artificially throttle themselves anyway, so if they know that they have more thermal headroom, typically you'll see a higher frequency, and then when things get uncomfortably hot, then that frequency will kind of throttle back down. That's what most cards do nowadays. So that explains why we don't have much variance for these graphics cards. Also, the RTX cards run fairly cool anyway, just they're more power limited than anything else. So yeah, 1 degree Celsius difference there, 65 versus 64 for the 220T, and then 64 versus 63 for the Meshify S2. So again, this case here is right on the heels of some of the best airflow cases on the market. Corsair wasn't lying when they called it the Corsair iQ 220T RGB airflow. Is that what it is? I can't remember. I don't know. It's something like that. Anyway, the 220T. If you just Google 220T, search it on Amazon or Newegg, you'll find this case. I think it also has a black chassis counterpart, so if you're into just black builds or black cases, that's totally fine as well. I chose white because I like the fact that this case had a white interior. Usually you just see white exteriors and then like a kind of a traditional matte black or whatever finish on the inside. So I'm glad that Corsair went all out with the white color scheme here, and I actually have a surprise for you guys. We're gonna be doing something really interesting in this. At least that's the plan anyway. We're gonna put a really beefy system in this case, and I'm gonna try to custom cool everything. Graphics card, CPU, and all with a 360mm rad up front. I don't exactly know how it's gonna work. We're gonna figure it out, and I think that the end result is going to look awesome. It's just gonna be a like perfectly packed system, no wasted space. All of it is utilized effectively. That's the goal, but you know, custom loops never really go according to plan. So I have another beefier case from Corsair that I'll use instead of this if I can't get it to work, but we're gonna get it to work. Now I'm gonna look up the price of this case real quick just to make sure, because if I'm wrong about the price, it's gonna totally throw off the results here, or at least my conclusions. So let's see, the Corsair iQ 220T RGB Airflow. This is the black one. I don't know if they have the white one on the same page. I don't see it. Anyway, looking at the black one on Newegg, I know you're not going to be able to see it much from there, but I have this case pulled up. It says it's selling for $109.99. That puts this right in the ringer for one of the more expensive but more effective and sexier mid-towers on the market. So slightly more expensive than like maybe the S340 Elite or the H500i. It's also going to be, I think, a bit more expensive than the Fractal Design Meshify C TG. Pretty sure anyway, it's not much more expensive than some of its rivals, and I honestly think Corsair did as good, if not better, a job in some respects over its counterparts. So my conclusion is this: if you don't want to buy a Fractal case, buy this instead. If maybe you just have something against Fractal, I don't know why. I don't know what Fractal would have done to you, but look, if you're just tired of seeing Fractal cases, maybe Fractal whatever, then this is, in my opinion, the next best alternative. In fact, to some of you, you might think this is a better case than the Fractal case. Maybe you just like Corsair. It doesn't matter. Everyone has a preference. I'm just trying to tell you that if you choose this over something like the Meshify C or even the S340 Elite or the H500i, you won't regret it. I really don't think that you're going to. Corsair did a great job here. I've been waiting for Corsair to come up with a proper mid-tower that doesn't have too many compromises. And apart from the slightly restricted right side panel that totally fell apart. Apart from the slight restriction on the right side for cable management, I don't think you're going to run into many more issues. Possibly, you know, some hardware compatibility issues. Maybe you have a really long power supply and you have a hard drive, and that's going to be a problem. Maybe you have a really long graphics card, but apart from those two issues, I don't see anything else wrong with this. I don't even see anything wrong with the price. I think that the 3 RGB fans up front are a nice take, and yeah, airflow emphasized everywhere. I'm not complaining about airflow, that's for sure. So Corsair definitely hit the mark with this one. With that, if you guys like the case, maybe just like the video, I don't care, maybe just like me if you're really weird, then you can give this video a thumbs up. I appreciate it. It's okay to be weird. You can click that red subscribe button if you haven't already, become a member if you're feeling especially fancy, and I will catch you in the next one. We've got a few other reviews coming up, as well as a dedicated video for the RTX 2080 Super. I've got some things to say about that card. Thanks for watching. I will catch you in the next one. This is Science Studio. Thanks for learning with us.